The deputy stepped out like the road belonged to him. The Marine stood in cuffs, silent, steady, and for a moment, the stronger man looked like the helpless one. A teenage boy by a gas station pump kept filming, not because he understood everything, but because something about the stop felt wrong. The deputy kept talking like the night was already settled. The Marine never raised his voice. And somewhere beyond those flashing lights, someone important had started asking why he had not arrived yet. The deputy spotted the dark sedan on the shoulder just after sunset, parked beside a narrow county road where pine trees pressed close and swallowed sound. He rolled in fast, lights throwing red and blue over the trunk, then stepped out with the stiff swagger of a man already certain he was in charge. Beside the car stood a tall black man in plain clothes, hands visible, posture steady, expression unreadable. Dark jeans, gray shirt, nothing flashy. Still, something about him looked precise. Like stillness had been trained into muscle. License and registration, the deputy snapped, closing the distance before the man had even spoken. The driver moved slowly toward the open door. "It's in the console, officer." That calm answer should have lowered the temperature. Instead, it seemed to irritate the deputy. He came closer, one hand hovering near his belt, eyes moving over the man's face with instant judgment. This was not caution. It was ego dressed like procedure. The documents were handed over without argument. The deputy barely glanced at them before demanding more. "Where were you coming from? Why stop here? Why stand outside the car? Why look so comfortable on my road tonight like this?" A pickup slowed as it passed. Then another car did the same. The flashing lights had turned a quiet roadside stop into a public stage, and the deputy seemed to enjoy that. His voice got louder. His questions got sharper. Less about facts, more about control. "You think you can just stand out here and do whatever you want?" he said, stepping closer. "You people always got an explanation ready." The man held his ground. His jaw tightened once, then settled. "I had a tire issue. I pulled over. That's all." The deputy laughed, and the sound carried farther than it should have. "That's all. Funny how it's always simple when I get here." Two teenagers near a gas station driveway stopped and watched. A woman inside the pickup leaned toward her window, concerned but not brave enough to intervene. The deputy noticed every eye on him and seemed to stand taller because of it. Still, the man never raised his voice. He did not argue. He did not puff up. He did not hand the deputy the reaction he wanted. That restraint changed the feeling of the scene. Most people would have shown fear. He only showed control. Instead, the deputy took that silence personally. You could see the moment suspicion hardened into insult. He stepped in close to make the threat obvious and held the man's license between two fingers like it offended him. "Turn around," he said. The man's eyes stayed level. For what? That was enough. Not resistance. Not refusal. Just one calm question spoken without panic. The deputy grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him against the side of the car. Metal rattled. Someone nearby gasped. "I said turn around." The deputy barked. Louder now, feeding himself with the sound of authority. The man turned. Not because the deputy was right, but because he understood what pride would cost in a moment like this. He placed his free hand on the roof when ordered. Red and blue light flashed across his face, but he did not struggle. The cuffs clicked shut, one wrist and then the other, each snap louder than it should have been. Now it was no longer a stop. It was a spectacle. The deputy looked around as if he had proved something. The people watching did not look impressed. They looked stunned and wondered who he was. Before this story unfolds, like and subscribe to Court of Crama, where hidden truth rises, power falls, and justice always finds its voice. The cuffs stayed tight, but the man wearing them did not flinch. Red and blue lights slid across his face as the deputy kept firing questions, trying to force panic out of him. "What are you doing out here? Who are you meeting? Why were you standing outside the vehicle?" Each one came harder than the last, more performance than investigation. The man answered the same way every time, short, respectful, controlled now. "I had a tire problem. I pulled over. My documents are in the car." No extra words. No attitude. No plea for mercy. He spoke with the kind of restraint that usually cools a scene, but here it did the opposite. The deputy stared at that composure like it was disrespect. Calm became suspicious. Discipline became guilt. A woman near the pickup whispered that he was not even arguing. A younger man muttered that the deputy seemed angry for no reason. The Marine heard both and said nothing. His breathing stayed even. His shoulders stayed square. He looked like a man tested before, and smart enough not to fight a losing moment with emotion. The deputy mistook that control for weakness, and that mistake pushed him further. Once the deputy decided calm meant hiding something, he stopped acting like a man doing his job and started chasing obedience. He patted the Marine down with rough, unnecessary force, checked his pockets twice, then ordered him wider against the car, as if the public needed a better view. Every movement carried a message. I can do this because I say I can. You get real quiet when things get serious, he said, loud enough for bystanders to hear. The Marine kept his voice level. I am cooperating. That answer made the deputy smirk. He opened the sedan, riffled through the console, then the glove box, then a bag in the back seat, tossing items aside without care. Papers bent. A flashlight rolled into the dirt. A change of clothes landed out of the car. He was not searching now. He was staging dominance. The crowd felt it. So did the Marine. But he gave the deputy nothing to feed on. No angry lunge. No curse. No desperate explanation. Just stillness under pressure. That restraint should have embarrassed the deputy. Instead, it made him louder. The longer the search dragged on, the more reckless his performance became before everyone watching. As the deputy kept digging through the car, small details began to stand out in ways he either missed or chose to ignore. The Marine's back stayed straight even in cuffs. When he shifted his footing, it was precise, almost automatic, like balance had been drilled into him over years. His hair was cut close. His shirt was plain but clean. Even the way he answered sounded measured, each word clipped and controlled. Near the rear seat, the deputy pulled up a worn duffel and let it drop back down. A faded sticker flashed for half a second before the bag rolled over. One of the teenagers squinted from the roadside. The woman by the pickup noticed it too, though she could not read it from where she stood. Then the Marine asked one quiet question. Please be careful with that. The words were polite, but something in them carried weight. Not fear. Respect. The deputy laughed and kept going, blind to what was right in front of him. The Marine lifted his chin slightly, eyes scanning the road with alert patience. Around them, the crowd's mood began to change. People were no longer just watching. They were noticing closely. Now the stop had an audience. A minivan pulled onto the gravel shoulder and stayed there with its headlights on. Two teenagers near the gas station lifted their phones without pretending not to. The woman in the pickup stepped out and stood beside her door, arms folded across her chest, like she wanted to say something but did not trust the badge enough to risk it. A delivery driver slowed, stared, and parked farther back. People kept arriving. What had started as one deputy, one driver, and one lonely stretch of road was turning into a public scene the deputy could not control. He acted like it changed nothing. He kept pacing around the Marine, voice sharp, shoulders set, asking the same questions louder each time as if volume could replace proof. But the mood around him had shifted. The bystanders were not reading danger in the man in cuffs. They were reading danger in the man holding power. Why is he still cuffed? Someone asked quietly. He hasn't even done anything. Another voice answered. The deputy heard every word, even when he pretended not to. The flashing lights no longer felt like his stage. They felt like exposure beginning. A young man near the back of the crowd leaned forward and narrowed his eyes at the Marine's forearms. When the Marine shifted, his sleeve pulled back enough to reveal an old tattoo near the wrist. It was not flashy, just a few sharp lines and the edge of an emblem that looked deliberate rather than decorative. The young man glanced at his friend. You see that? He whispered. The friend nodded, then looked toward the car. The deputy had left the driver's license on the hood, along with papers dragged from the console. One had a stiff official look to it, partly folded, partly hidden under the registration. Nobody could read it from there, but it did not look random. It looked official, handled often, and important to someone. Then there was the Marine himself. Even in cuffs, he stood like he was trained never to slump. His feet stayed planted. His chin stayed level. He answered nothing unless asked, and when he did speak, He did it without fear or apology. The deputy called that suspicious. The crowd started calling it something else in their own minds. Disciplined, professional, maybe official. The story was getting harder to force. The deputy noticed the whispering, the phones, the longer stares, and it lit something harsher in him. Instead of backing off, he pushed deeper. He snatched the papers off the hood, waved them once like they proved his point, then tossed them back down with a sneer. "You all think you know what's going on," he shouted toward the crowd. "You don't know a thing." Nobody answered, but nobody looked away either. That silence got under his skin. He turned back to the Marine and yanked him a step from the car, making the cuffs bite harder. The woman by the pickup gasped. One of the teenagers said, "Yo, that's too much," while still recording. The Marine stayed on his feet and said only, "I am not resisting." The deputy laughed as if that gave him permission to go further. "That's what they always say." Then he ordered the Marine against the vehicle again, harder this time, pressing him there in full view of everyone watching. It was no longer about a stop. It was about refusing to save face, and by choosing pride before witnesses. The deputy made this scene harder to defend when the truth fully caught up, 40 miles away. Inside a quiet administrative building where clocks mattered and delays rarely went unnoticed, a conference room was waiting on one person. A folder sat open at an empty seat. A briefing screen glowed at the front wall. 2 officers had already checked the time 3 times without saying much, because the man who was late was not known for being late. He was the kind of person who arrived early, reviewed everything once more, and entered a room with calm precision. At first, the delay felt minor. A flat tire, dead signal, traffic. Ordinary explanations moved through the room in low voices. Then 5 more minutes passed. A call was placed. No answer. Another followed. Still nothing. A captain standing near the window looked down at the screen of his phone and frowned. That's not like him. The room changed after that. Silence stopped feeling casual and started feeling wrong. A travel route was checked. Estimated arrival times were compared. His last message was pulled up and read again. He had been on schedule. He had been close. Then he had gone still. And in a world built on timing, absence became its own quiet warning sign. The captain did not waste time with theories. He stepped into the hallway, called a staff sergeant who had seen the Marine leave, and started building the last version of the day. Departure time, vehicle, route, destination, purpose. Every answer narrowed the gap between normal delay and real concern. He should have been there by now, the staff sergeant said. No detours. No stops except if something forced one. The captain called again. Straight to voicemail. Then he reached out to a contact handling coordination on short notice. Another officer pulled up the vehicle information. Someone else checked whether there had been an accident on the route. Nothing. No collision report. No roadside assistance call. No message explaining delay. That absence was louder than bad news. Within minutes, the tone shifted from inconvenience to trace. Last known location. Last outgoing call. Nearby county jurisdiction. A clerk looked up when she heard the route name and said a patrol area sat along that road after dark. The captain's expression hardened. Find out if anybody stopped him, he said. Help was moving now. Methodically and without noise. The roadside deputy had no idea that his scene was no longer his alone. Back on the roadside, the deputy felt bigger with every passing minute. No supervisor had arrived. No second unit had checked his tone. No voice from dispatch had cut through his certainty. So he leaned harder into the role he had written for himself. Circling the Marine like the scene belonged to him, he held up items from the car one by one. Not because they proved anything, but because spectacle kept him in charge. What's this? What's this supposed to tell me? He asked, tossing things onto the hood, then into the seat, then back onto the gravel. A shirt, a flashlight, papers, a notebook. Every careless movement drew sharper looks from the crowd. The Marine said little. His silence made the deputy push more. You think staying quiet makes you smart, he said. You think it makes you untouchable. The answer never came. That deepened the deputy's confidence. To him, silence looked like surrender. To everyone else, it was starting to look like discipline under insult. He shoved the car door closed harder than necessary and stepped in front of the Marine again. full of power, still unaware that real authority had already started moving toward him fast. The deputy planted himself in front of the Marine again, waiting for the kind of reaction he still had not managed to get. The flashing lights cut across both of them, washing the roadside in restless color. Gravel shifted under a few bystanders' shoes as the crowd held its breath. For the first time since the cuffs went on, the Marine lifted his head fully and spoke before being ordered to. "I am a United States Marine," he said. He did not say it loudly. He did not throw it like a threat. He did not use it to beg, posture, or demand special treatment. He said it the way a man states his name or his rank in a room where facts should matter. Then he added, calm as ever, "My identification is in the inside pocket of the bag you dropped." The deputy stared at him for half a beat, surprised less by the words than by the steadiness behind them. The Marine's breathing never changed. His shoulders stayed square. Even in cuffs, he spoke with the controlled clarity of someone used to pressure, used to chain of command, used to being judged by how he handled the worst moment in the room. It was a clean opening. A simple fact. A chance for the deputy to step back before the mistake got any bigger. But pride got there first. The deputy let out a short, ugly laugh and looked toward the crowd, as if the statement itself were a performance. "A Marine," he said. "That's supposed to impress me." Nobody answered. He took one slow step closer, voice dropping into something meaner. "You think a title changes these cuffs? You think telling me what uniform you wore gives you a pass out here?" The Marine said nothing. That silence only fed the deputy's arrogance. He turned, grabbed the duffel from the back seat, and shook it once before dropping it onto the hood. "Everybody's something when they get caught," he said, loud enough for every phone recording him to catch it clearly. Veteran, preacher, deacon, hero, heard it all. The woman by the pickup looked sick of him now. One of the teenagers whispered, "Man, just check the ID." Instead, the deputy pushed harder, pretending the cuffs had already settled the truth. To him, the public shame mattered more than the facts. He wanted the Marine small, silent, and wrong. Even after being handed an easy way out. By refusing that exit, he made his coming fall steeper than it had to be. The deputy finally yanked open the bag, not with care, but with the irritated force of a man searching for something to disprove. A few papers slid free. A wallet, a folded folder, a clipped holder with official-looking credentials tucked behind clear plastic. For a second, the crowd could not see what was in his hand. Then his expression shifted, only slightly, but enough. He turned the holder toward the light, read something, then read it again. The swagger did not disappear, but it flickered. One of the teenagers caught that on video. The woman near the pickup saw it and straightened where she stood. At the same moment, the radio on the deputy's shoulder crackled. Dispatch called his unit number once. Then again, sharper this time, he answered with forced annoyance. "Go ahead." There was a pause, then a voice he did not expect asked him to confirm the name of the man in custody. The deputy's jaw tightened. Now the truth was no longer just standing in cuffs beside him. It was moving through records, through voices, through systems bigger than his badge. He had mocked something he did not understand, and that institution had finally begun to answer back. The radio hissed again, then came alive with a different tone. Dispatch was no longer casual. The voice on the other end asked the deputy to repeat the Marine's full name, spell it carefully, and confirm the date of birth from the identification he had just pulled. The deputy answered with clipped irritation, but everyone close enough to hear could tell the rhythm had changed. This was no routine follow-up now. It was verification. A second voice came through a moment later, lower and more formal, asking whether the subject was secured and why. The deputy glanced toward the crowd before answering, like he suddenly remembered every phone pointed at him. He said the stop was under investigation, said the man had been uncooperative, said he was sorting things out. But the words sounded thinner now. The Marine stood in silence while the deputy talked around the truth. Somewhere beyond the roadside, records were opening. Names were being matched. Calls were reaching desks that did not ignore details. The deputy could not see any of that, but he could feel it. His shoulders tightened. His replies got shorter. The ground was shifting beneath him that very moment now. For real. Then another unit pulled up. A patrol SUV rolled in behind the first cruiser, and a broad-shouldered sergeant stepped out, scanning the scene in one sweep. He saw the crowd, the phones, the scattered belongings on the gravel, the Marine in cuffs, and the deputy standing too rigid beside him. The sergeant did not rush in with authority at first. He walked over and asked the most dangerous kind of question. What exactly happened here? The deputy answered too fast. Disabled vehicle. Suspicious behavior. Refused to comply. Standard stop. The sergeant listened, but his eyes kept drifting back to the Marine, who looked nothing like a threat and everything like a man controlling himself under pressure. Then the radio on the deputy's shoulder crackled once more, and the sergeant heard enough of the incoming voice to catch verification. That changed his face. He looked at the ID holder sitting open on the hood, then at the deputy. "Did you confirm this before cuffing him?" he asked. The deputy hesitated. "Only for a second, but it was enough." The sergeant stepped back half a pace, no longer standing beside the deputy. That small distance said more than a speech could have. The deputy felt it immediately. The crowd noticed. The sergeant noticed. Even the Marine noticed, though he gave no sign beyond a steady breath. The deputy was losing the clean wall of authority he had been hiding behind. So he did what men like him often do when the facts turn dangerous. He tried to rewrite the story before it settled. "He was giving me non-compliance indicators from the start," he said. Louder now, speaking to the sergeant but really performing for every witness around them. "Wouldn't answer clean. Kept that attitude. Body language was off." The Marine turned his head slightly. "I answered every question." The deputy pointed at him without looking. "See, that tone right there? That's what I'm talking about." A few people in the crowd let out disbelieving sounds. One of the teenagers said, "He's been calm the whole time." The woman by the pickup added, "You were rough with him before he even did anything." The deputy ignored them and kept building his version, stacking weak justifications on top of each other as if repetition could make them solid. But every sentence sounded more desperate than the one before, and everyone could hear it. Phones were no longer just pointed at the scene. They were collecting it. One teenager stepped closer and said he had the moment the deputy grabbed the Marine after nothing more than a calm question. The woman from the pickup said she heard every word from the first demand for license and registration to the line about "you people." The delivery driver added the time he pulled in, which matched the dispatch record and undercut the deputy's claim that the stop had turned dangerous later. Even the scattered items on the gravel told their own story. Papers thrown out after the cuffs, not before. A duffel opened roughly. Identification ignored until the crowd started noticing. The sergeant listened, checked his watch, then looked at the deputy's body camera indicator with a face that gave nothing away. That was worse. Volume had ruled this roadside for too long, but facts were arriving from every angle now, each one small, on its own, heavier together. The deputy tried to interrupt twice, but every new detail landed cleaner than his explanations. For the first time all night, the scene was no longer bending toward whoever spoke loudest, and everyone there could feel that. Through all of it, the Marine never chased sympathy. He stood where they placed him, wrists still cuffed, shoulders squared despite the ache creeping into his arms. When the sergeant asked direct questions, he answered directly. When bystanders spoke up for him, he did not perform gratitude for the crowd. He only told the truth in clean, spare lines, as though he understood that dignity carried farther than outrage. That contrast was crushing the deputy more than any accusation. The deputy's voice kept rising, hands moving faster, jaw tightening every time the Marine stayed calm. One man looked unstable, the other looked trained. One seemed eager to control the scene. The other seemed determined not to disgrace himself inside it. Even the silence around them began favoring the Marine. People stopped whispering and simply watched. The air changed into something heavier, almost formal, as though the roadside had become a place where conduct was being measured. The Marine lifted his chin once, eyes tracking the dark road ahead, patient and unreadable. It was not the look of a man hoping to be rescued. It was the look of a man who knew truth did not need help forever. That night. Then the change came without warning. The sergeant's radio crackled, but this time he did not let the deputy answer first. He listened, said only "understood,"
and his posture altered in a way the crowd noticed immediately. Not panic, not confusion, recognition. He asked the deputy for the identification again, checked the name, then looked down the road as if measuring distance against time. The deputy tried to press his version one more time, but the sergeant cut him off with a raised hand. That gesture landed harder than a shout. A low murmur moved through the bystanders. Someone important was coming. Nobody knew exactly who yet, but everyone felt the scene tip. The deputy felt it most. He straightened his vest, looked toward his cruiser, then back at the Marine, as if he needed the cuffs to still mean something. They did not. Even the flashing lights seemed smaller now. A minute later another voice came through the radio, more formal than dispatch, asking for the scene to be held exactly as it was. The crowd went still, the deputy's face strained by a shade. Judgment was on the road now, and nobody there mistook what that meant anymore. The road went still before anyone saw the vehicle. No siren, no rush of noise. Just a dark government SUV turning off the highway and rolling toward the flashing patrol lights with the kind of quiet confidence that made people move without being told. The bystanders stepped back on instinct. The sergeant straightened. Even the deputy seemed to forget how to stand for a second. The door opened, and a senior officer stepped out in dress greens worn with the ease of someone who had never needed volume to prove rank. A general. He did not hurry. He did not scan the scene like a man looking for drama. He took it in once, fully, and that was enough. The cuffs, the Marine, the scattered belongings, the phones in witness hands. The deputy still trying to look in control. True command had arrived, and everybody felt the difference immediately. The deputy's swagger did not survive that first look. He shifted his weight, touched his vest, glanced toward the sergeant, then back again. None of it helped. The general had not raised his voice, had not asked for a report, had not even spoken yet, and still the whole power structure changed around him. That was the first real silence of the night. The general stepped closer and stopped beside the Marine first, not the deputy. His eyes moved once over the cuffs at the Marine's wrists, then up to his face. "Are you injured?" he asked. "No, sir," the Marine said. Only then did the general turn to the deputy. "Why is he restrained?" The question was simple. That made it worse. The deputy started fast, trying to rebuild the scene before it collapsed. Suspicious behavior. Failure to comply. Ongoing investigation. Officer safety. He threw out each phrase like one of them might still hold. The general let him speak just long enough to expose the weakness in his own words. Then he asked the next question. "What crime?" The deputy hesitated. The general looked at the sergeant. "Did you verify his identification?" "Yes, sir." "And after verification, why was he still in cuffs?" The sergeant did not answer right away, because there was no clean answer left. The general glanced toward the bystanders, the phones, the belongings on the gravel, then back to the deputy. His voice never rose. It did not need to. "You were given facts. You chose theater." The deputy opened his mouth again, but the general cut through it with calm force. "Enough. I have heard all I need." With that, every excuse the deputy had tried to build lost its shape in front of everyone there. The general took one step toward the deputy and held out his hand. "Keys." For a brief, humiliating second, the deputy did not move. Then the sergeant said quietly, "Now." The deputy pulled the cuff key free with stiff fingers and passed it over. The general did not let him touch the Marine again. He walked behind the Marine himself, unlocked one wrist, then the other. And the metal came away with two sharp clicks that sounded even louder than when they had gone on. The Marine lowered his arms slowly, flexing life back into his hands, but he did not rub his wrists or make a show of the pain. He simply stood straight again. The general faced him. "Stand easy, Marine." Then he turned to the deputy, and the temperature of the scene dropped another degree. "You are done here," he said. "You will not speak to him again. You will not touch his property. You will not shape this scene one word further." The deputy looked like he wanted to protest, but there was nowhere left to hide. Witnesses were watching. His own sergeant had stepped away from him. The Marine was free, and the general had made one thing unmistakably clear. This conduct was not being managed, softened, or excused. It was being shut down in public. The deputy lost ground all at once. 1 minute he had been the loudest person on the roadside. The next, He could not even decide where to look. The sergeant ordered him away from the Marine and told him to stand by his cruiser. Another officer quietly moved between him and the crowd, not to protect his authority, but to contain the damage. That shift did not go unnoticed. The bystanders who had been cautious before now stood straighter, phones still raised, confidence growing with every second the deputy stayed silent. Nobody was whispering anymore. They had seen the balance change with their own eyes. The general gave short, precise instructions. Secure the scene. Preserve the footage. Log every witness. Do not touch the Marine's belongings until they are documented. Each order made the deputy smaller. Each one told the crowd this was no longer embarrassment that would vanish by morning. This was consequence taking form in real time. Even the deputy's posture changed. The swagger was gone. His shoulders looked heavy now, his face set in that tight expression men wear when they know the room has stopped believing them. He had wanted an audience. Now he had one, and it was costing him everything. The general's response did not stop at the roadside. He asked for the deputy's body camera footage to be preserved immediately and requested the time stamp from dispatch to match it against witness video. The sergeant wrote fast, no longer trying to smooth the scene into something cleaner than it was. A supervisor from the sheriff's office was called in, then another. The language around the stop changed with every passing minute. No one said misunderstanding. No one said confusion. They used words like incident, review, conduct, and chain of custody. The deputy heard all of it. One officer took his written statement, but even that felt different now. It was not a chance to explain. It was a record being built around him. Another officer collected names from the crowd, and people gave them willingly. The woman by the pickup, the delivery driver, the teenagers with footage. The roadside spectacle the deputy had turned into a performance was becoming a case file with witnesses, timestamps, and recorded dialogue. By then, reputation had already started slipping out from under him. His own side had stopped defending tone and started preserving proof. That was the clearest sign of all. The system was no longer circling around his badge. It was moving around his mistake. Through it all, the Marine never tried to enjoy the deputy's collapse. He rolled his shoulders once, flexed feeling back into his hands, and listened carefully when the general spoke to him. When asked if he wanted medical attention, he answered simply. When offered a chance to add anything for the record, he kept to the facts. No speech, no revenge, no effort to humiliate the man who had tried so hard to humiliate him. That restraint settled the scene more than any order could. The crowd saw it too. The Marine did not need the deputy's shame beyond what had already happened. He did not need to win with noise. Standing there in the aftermath, calm and composed, he made the whole contrast impossible to miss. One man had been handed power and used it recklessly. The other had it taken from him for a moment and still kept his dignity. The general nodded once, as if that quiet discipline confirmed everything worth knowing. Around them, the roadside finally began to feel less like a scene of public humiliation and more like the end of a hard truth coming into focus. The deputy's punishment mattered, but the deeper victory belonged to the man who had endured the cuffs without letting them define him.
When the noise finally started to fall away, the Marine stood beside his car and let the quiet reach him in pieces. The road was still marked by flashing lights and low voices, but the pressure had changed. No one was shouting now. No one was grabbing him. No one was trying to force him into somebody else's version of the night. For the first time since the deputy had stepped out of that cruiser with false certainty in his stride, the Marine had room to breathe. He looked down once at the red marks around his wrists. They were not dramatic, but they were enough. Small proof of how fast power could turn cruel when it answered only to itself. He flexed his hands again, more slowly now, feeling the soreness settle in. He had carried himself with discipline through every insult, every rough order, every moment meant to provoke him into becoming easier to blame. That control had cost something. It always did. Calm under humiliation was not free. The general spoke to him quietly, with the kind of respect that did not need ceremony. The Marine answered the same way he had all night, steady, brief, grounded. He did not ask for pity. He did not ask the moment to become larger than it already was. He only stood there as a man who had been tested in public and had chosen not to surrender the part of himself that mattered most, What lingered after the roadside chaos was not just the memory of abuse. It was the contrast between two kinds of authority. One had arrived loud, insecure, hungry to dominate. The other had arrived silent, clear, and impossible to shake. That was the part everybody there would remember long after the lights disappeared from the trees. The deputy had worn a badge and treated it like permission. He mistook force for control, humiliation for order, and suspicion for proof. He wanted obedience more than truth. Every decision he made came from the same broken instinct: make the other person smaller, and nobody will question you. But real authority did not need any of that. The general had not raised his voice. He had not performed power for the crowd. He had simply seen what was happening, named it, and stopped it. That was command in its real form. It protected dignity instead of crushing it. It demanded facts instead of excuses. It measured strength not by how quickly someone could overpower another man, but by whether they could stand inside responsibility without abusing it. That was the larger truth this night exposed. False authority always thinks it can win in the moment. Real authority thinks about what must still be honorable when the moment is over. And once that difference became visible, the deputy's entire performance looked smaller than ever. At last, the Marine gathered the last of his belongings from the hood and the gravel. A flashlight, a folded paper, the worn duffel the deputy had handled without care. This time no one tossed anything. No one barked in order. The general stood nearby. The sergeant kept his distance. The bystanders remained quiet, watching with the kind of attention usually reserved for endings people know they will remember. The deputy stood off to the side near his cruiser, no longer the center of anything. The road that had felt like his stage now held him like a witness to his own collapse. He had wanted to make an example out of the wrong man. Instead, the night had made an example out of him. The Marine opened the car door and paused for one last second before getting in. Not for drama, not for revenge, just long enough for the meaning of the moment to settle over the whole road. He was leaving exactly as he should have been left from the beginning, uncuffed, upright, and fully himself. Behind him, the deputy had lost the only power he ever really trusted, the kind borrowed from fear and noise. Ahead of him, the road stretched out dark and open. And in the end, that was the final justice of it. The cuffs came off. The truth stayed on.